Let's start with something The Mandalorian did really well. This show has an incredibly strong style. But what's great isn't just how fun and engaging this style is, it's that it gets what made the original trilogy so cool and matches that style. George Lucas wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie, but he couldn't get the rights, so instead he made Star Wars. Like Flash Gordon, Star Wars has its roots in the space western genre. Like the original trilogy, The Mandalorian grounds itself in a bunch of familiar space western tropes. There is a palpable sense of a seedy frontier where people are largely isolated, government is sparse, non-existent, or the enemy, and dated and unreliable technology is the norm. The original trilogy mixed these Western tropes with a good dose of old-fashioned heroism, tenacity, and redemption, and set its characters against a sleek and technologically superior empire, borrowing heavily from America's own origin myth of the rebel underdog. The Mandalorian uses many of those Western tropes, but remixes them once again. It keeps intact that Star Wars Western feel, but makes the story and characters its own. But beyond the plot and tropes, the way The Mandalorian focuses on characters, grounds humor, and emphasizes practical effects also gives it that original trilogy style. Akira Kurosawa, whose movies would be very important in the Western genre, was very big on complete and realistic sets and effects because it helps the quality of an actor's performance. The Mandalorian too went to great lengths to make what the actors see on set be extremely close to what their character sees in the final cut. When a set feels real to an actor, it helps it to be real to the character, which helps it to be real to us. The practical effects and sets also tend to have a certain amount of gritty realism to them, which works with the space western aesthetic. This was a big part of what helped the performances of the original cast feel natural. Like the original trilogy, The Mandalorian has its fair share of humor.
Who's this guy?
The sequel trilogy also had a lot of humor and was criticized for it. But it wasn't the humor itself that I think people had a problem with, it was how the humor was done. See, in the original trilogy, humor never changed or undercut the overall tone of a scene. If a scene is tense, humor might lighten or even break the tension, but never undercut it.
I don't think it's
No time to discuss this in committee!
I am not a committee!
The original trilogy would never ever make fun of the plot, character, or scenes of its own movie. The Mandalorian follows this mold of lightening or breaking tension without undercutting the scene itself, which also helps it feel like the original trilogy.
Tea.
Lastly, and most importantly, it understands that in a big, strange universe, everything needs to be grounded in the characters. In the most famous Star Wars review of all time, Plinkett says this about lightsaber fights.
I gotta really stress this point that lightsaber duels have less to do with the fight itself, but more so with the internalization of the characters.
If it's about the characters, we should be getting lots of dialogue and eye contact. It should prioritize the acting, character, and scene over the choreography and combat. See how in these shots the lightsaber fight is barely even in frame, while Luke's face is center frame? That doesn't mean there should be no cool combat choreography, just that it should always be working to support the characters and scene. Here, Luke does a sick backflip, but it's to further his character goal of disengaging the fight so they can talk. Both of the lightsaber-ish fight scenes in The Mandalorian understand this, and so you get lots of shots like these. There's a clear emphasis on keeping the characters and their acting in frame. However, this scene also starts to lead us into the things I didn't like.
Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
But before we get into that, I want to give a disclaimer. There is nothing wrong with liking something. I think for a lot of people, the sense of style, so beautifully reminiscent of the original trilogy, was all they needed the show to maintain for it to hold their love. And that's awesome. I don't want you to feel like these criticisms that I'm going to make are an attack on your enjoyment of the show. Everyone enjoys media differently, and something that works for one person won't work for another. I criticize something because it engaged me, and I want to pick it apart to see what worked and what didn't. I do this because it's fun for me to see what lessons we can learn and to explain how I think a piece of media can lose people. Now, to understand how The Mandalorian started to lose me, we need to go back and look closely at how it hooked me so well all the way back in those first 3 episodes. Let's start with a deceptively simple but important question. What is The Mandalorian about? I don't mean what the plot is or who the characters are. I mean, what is the story itself about? For me, the story in the first 3 episodes is about 2 conflicting aspects of our protagonist's identity. On the one hand, we have Mando the professional. We are introduced to him first. He is efficient, cold, and secretive, not one to let things like feelings get in the way of his job. When he gets his pauldron, we are introduced to our second aspect, Mando the survivor. This is what gives him his instant connection to the child. This forces these 2 aspects of his personality into direct conflict, and that conflict is what these first 3 episodes are about. It all comes to a head in this scene, and that's part of what makes this scene so incredible. This scene is shot, acted, and scored beautifully. But that's not just what makes it great. If the show hadn't been building towards this conflict from the moment Mando met the child, it just wouldn't work. The emotional power of this moment comes from the very heart of what the story is about. Another wonderful thing about these early episodes is how closely the core of the story works with the stylistic aesthetic of the show. Mando's professional survivalist vibe of secrecy and efficiency translates just perfectly into the show's minimalist, efficient, and secretive aesthetic. But at the end of the 3rd episode, this conflict is resolved. In this scene, Mando the survivor wins. So, what's the show going to be about now? Well, the natural follow-up seemed like it would be about the difficulties of Mando becoming a father. He didn't exactly seek out being a father here, he just acted to preserve a child he had a connection with, and now all of a sudden it's in his care. This brings us to episode 4. Last time I criticized this episode, but I wasn't very specific. I just mentioned that we were starting to get away from showing and towards telling. Let's take a closer look.
Let's see, Sorgan. Looks like there's no starport, no industrial centers, no population density. Real backwater scuggle, which means it's perfect for us. You ready to lay low and stretch your legs for a couple of months, you little womp rat? Nobody's gonna find us here.
Well, that was a lot of firsts. The first 2 times Mando talked to the kid were,
Hey, spit that out. It's not a toy.
so this is the first time we get warmth from him. It's the first time he calls him a nickname. Immediately we can tell it's not going to be about becoming a father. If it was, these moments of warmth, affection, bestowing nicknames, they would be treated with some sort of drama instead of just chucked in here with throwaway lines. It's like their connection was forged into affection off screen, or the writer just wrote some standard tropish dad dialogue for Mando without thinking about it. Yes, when you have a kid or a pet, you start talking to it. You start to. It's a gradual shift. In writing terms, it would be a character arc. This is a character hard left turn. This is also the first time we ever get the name of a planet in this series. It's also more than double the amount of words Mando has ever said at a time in the entire series. The longest line up to this point was 20 words. This line is 50 words. He is talking and expositing a hell of a lot here. This will continue over the course of the episode. Mando has 682 words in the episode, almost triple the average of the previous 3. His minimalist, secretive, efficient aesthetic is basically gone. This doesn't mean that Mando can't talk or that writing dialogue for him is bad, but it does mean that we are abandoning the style and we ought to have a good reason for it. I can't see one. And it looks to me like it's a wasted opportunity for some character conflict and drama. He could grow out of his previous coldness as his connection to the kid deepens. He should start talking more to the kid, but he shouldn't start doing it all at once, and it should be mined for drama. And this is especially obnoxious because after this episode, his relationship with the kid will be pushed entirely to the side. He just leaves the kid on the ship for the next 2 episodes. Cowboy Bebop is another space western with a strong style and a mix of vignettes and episodes which advance the character's story. But every single episode builds up the themes of the overall story, even if the plot has nothing to do with it. In Sympathy for the Devil, Spike pits himself against a kid who stopped aging and can't die. It seems like just an unrelated vignette, but it's not. See, Spike's whole story is about him being stuck in the past. He can't get over what happened to him, and even when he has the opportunities to move on and build new relationships, he can't. This inability to move and grow means that he's already dead. He's just looking for the challenge that finally kills him. When he finally returns the past to the kid, it kills the kid, which foreshadows the end of the show. The only time the Mandalorian comes close to anything like this in these middle episodes is here when she tries to take his helmet off and he has a moment of conflict before he stops her, which helps set up the climax of the season. That's it. This is the real problem with Mando talking too much. It's not that it's wrong, it's that him changing and becoming more open is so clearly what these 3 middle episodes should have been about, and it's just brushed by so we can get to, honestly, I don't even know. I get that these episodes are references to some of the show's influences, but there's nothing in them that makes me care about what's going on. They don't add anything to the show as a whole, and they could have. Up to this point, he seemed like a total loner, not even fully accepted among the Mandalorians. By the end of this episode, he will have a relationship with the kid, the fighter chick, and the widow, and all of them will seem like they happened super easily and naturally. But not every story necessarily needs to have some deeper meaning. Sometimes a unique style and quality execution can carry even a whole movie. Unfortunately, in The Mandalorian, the quality also slips. None of the characters in these middle episodes come close to being as good as any of the characters in the first 3 episodes, and some of them are downright irritating. The pace slows way, way down, and the dialogue starts sounding really weird in places. But they manage to bring it home in the last 2 episodes. It starts feeling tight and dramatic again. The dialogue stops sounding so weird. The best characters make their comeback. And best of all, it's about stuff again. Mando's mistrust of IG when they really have a lot in common speaks to something about his character. The last episode, called Redemption, is about IG's redemption story, which mirrors Mando's story of redemption back in Chapter 3. Even Grief gets a little mini redemption arc. This works really well because redemption is a core piece of what the original Star Wars trilogy was about. In the first season, The Mandalorian looked like Star Wars. It felt like Star Wars and was about the things that Star Wars was about. So I ended up really liking it despite its flaws. As much as Mando's drastic and sudden increase in talking and explaining bothered me in Chapter 4, by the time we get to these last 2 chapters, it feels like this is where his character arc was supposed to end up. But I still wish we had gotten to watch this character arc actually occur on screen. The movie The Professional is a really good comparison. Leon's scene at the keyhole almost perfectly mirrors Mando's scene in the cockpit. But Leon and Matilda actually get to have a relationship that has conflict, doubt, uncertainty, and drama. Yeah, Baby Yoda is a baby, and they can't speak the same language, but ask any parent, you can have a very difficult relationship with a baby. We do get hints of that difficulty, but the show doesn't follow through on using it to create actual drama. Unfortunately, these kinds of wasted opportunities for character conflict and drama are what will go on to define the second season. Once again, I think the strong style helped carry many people through the season. And in many ways, that style was only improved in Season 2. The physical sets and props only got better, and it still has that Western feel. The classic Star Wars texture is still there, and is probably strengthened by the inclusion of, and references to, so many of the expanded universe's greatest hits. There's nothing wrong with enjoying that. But what originally made me fall in love with the show wasn't just the Star Wars feel, and unfortunately, that is all the second season is. It's not about anything. None of the main characters grow or develop in a meaningful way. There's no interesting character conflict, and we don't even get a single interesting new original character in the entire season. The fan service is dialed up to 11, and we simply recycle the plot and villains from the first season. In terms of theme, emotion, and character, what you might call the substance, the whole season just coasts on the work of the last season. The final scene of Season 2 is wonderful. Having suddenly and unexpectedly completed his mission of finding a Jedi willing to care for and train Grogu, Din chooses to forsake his vows and removes his helmet because he needs Grogu to see his face before he goes. It's beautiful, and it would have been just as beautiful of a scene if Luke had swooped down in his X-Wing and met them on Navarro at the end of Season 1, because literally nothing happened this entire season that changed their relationship in any way. Speaking of Luke, let's talk about fan service. Now, to be clear, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with fan service. What matters is what always matters: how you use it. In the last episode of Season 1, Mando Smith says she knows about the Jedi because
The songs of eons past tell of battles between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called Jedi that fought with such powers.
I loved this because she's referencing one of my favorite Star Wars games, Knights of the Old Republic. But it isn't just a reference to that. It's also exposition at the same time, because the story needs someone to tell our heroes about Jedi, and it also helps characterize her as a Mandalorian lorekeeper. This piece of dialogue is a reference for fans to catch, but it still simultaneously supports the story, and if you don't catch the reference, it doesn't sound out of place at all, because it also moves the plot forward. In Return of the Jedi, Jabba captures Leia and makes her wear a bikini. This shows us that Jabba is a slob. But at the same time, can we think of any other factors outside the story that are maybe influencing this decision? The fact that she had to sit straight and couldn't have creases on her sides sounds like it was for the camera and the male audience, not for characterizing Jabba. It isn't a core part of the story. It's not moving the story forward at the same time as being fan service. It's fan service wrapped in a justification. Ahsoka is probably my favorite new character in this season. For one, Jedi are just cool, but she's also super charismatic and is clearly haunted by her past, which gives her character some depth. Now, they didn't make this character. She's from the animated series Clone Wars, which I have never watched. But regardless of where she's from, her character is working. Her dialogue feels realistic, and she's got great stage presence. This episode is the absolute peak of the awesome style of the show. It's so incredibly cool. I love how she is shot like a horror movie villain, and she helps us get back to what was great about the first season, Grogu and Mando's relationship. I already praised how well they did this lightsaber fight too, keeping it grounded in character as opposed to focusing only on the choreography. But there's one bit that didn't sit right with me.
Now tell me, where is your master? Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
Why did she say this? Did Ahsoka think she wasn't answering because she was confused about what she was asking? No, clearly she said this for our benefit. This was the big reveal for the audience of what she's doing here and why she cares about this woman. But the problem is, that's all it is. It isn't connected to the story at all. It doesn't serve a character purpose. It's just a reference. So, why is it here? Yeah, I know who Thrawn is. I don't know why Ahsoka does, or why she cares, or why I should care. If the writer had cared about that, they would have made her talk to Mando about it, so she could give some sort of story or character-based explanation for why she cares, instead of just dramatically saying his name. This is the kind of fan service that I find extremely irritating, because it starts to crack my immersion. It doesn't feel like the characters are acting in ways that make sense with their character or their story. Instead, their character is being hijacked to make an irrelevant reference. This is why I hated
I don't know. Dragon to Beggar's Canyon.
And it's not just that it seems out of place, it also sounds so desperate. You guys love A New Hope, right? Please love me too.
Luke, at that speed, will you be able to pull out in time? Be just like Beggar's Canyon back home.
It's like that bit in Scott Pilgrim, where Knives sees Scott's new girlfriend and decides that the reason he likes her is because her hair is dyed, so she goes and dyes her hair too. It's seeing something that other people like and copying the most superficial parts of it. It comes off as kind of sad. And unfortunately, that describes almost all of the fan service this season. There were a lot of references, but they didn't really have any connection to a central story or theme the way they did in the first season. by the time we got to Boba and the Dark Troopers, the story was starting to lose me. For one, I was starting to notice that this was mostly a redo of the Season 1 climax, and redoing things is another problem Star Wars tends to have. But it was also starting to feel like, instead of telling a character-focused story, we were just going through the list of the expanded universe's greatest hits. So it was no surprise that in the end, the expanded universe's greatest hit of all piloted his X-Wing into the show. But I didn't mind this. They had been seeding that a Jedi would be coming to collect Grogu for a while now, and if you had been running through the timeline in your head, you were probably at least half expecting this. It's foreshadowed well, it's part of the story, and it triggers our emotional climax. I won't pretend it wasn't satisfying to see the Luke I grew up with on screen again after his ruthless character assassination in The Last Jedi. But what's more important is that the writers did the work to make this feel like a natural and important part of the story of Season 2. Unfortunately, it's also the only part of this season's story that works. Because if you remember, before Luke showed up, Bo and Mando were having a bit of a conflict over the Darksaber because it was hers, but now he has it, and it can only be taken by force or something. But this conflict didn't get resolved. And then after Luke takes Grogu, they are all still standing there without any sort of resolution. And honestly, it's kind of funny. Because what it feels like is that they were trying to have the climax of Bo and Mando's storyline, but it just wasn't working because they hadn't built enough of a foundation for their character relationship. So they went to the cabinet marked, "In case of story failure, break glass," and hit the "Have Luke save them from the Dark Troopers and take Grogu" button, and then just sort of hoped no one would notice that they didn't actually resolve this part of the story. The thing is, if I squint, I can see the shell of a functional story. Like, these Mandalorians take their helmets off whenever, right? And at the end, Mando does too, which kind of moves him closer in identity to them. He also apparently now owns the Darksaber, which has some sort of significance to these Mandalorians. It feels like there's supposed to be some sort of resolution to this, where Mando sort of starts becoming more like them, which could have been played off of Boba Fett's lack of a Mandalorian identity as well. But in the end, they couldn't make it work, because they had wasted all of the time these characters spent on screen. In the entire season, there is zero development of any of these characters, and so they couldn't execute an actual climax and resolution for them. I found this really frustrating, because all of the pieces are there, but they just don't use them. It's like a competent writer drafted up the outline for the season, but whoever actually ended up writing the episodes didn't understand how to execute the character development and relationships. Here's how I think it could have worked. The Marshal was a good opportunity to start raising questions about the value of Mando's creed and identity. He's defending this village from bandits using the armor. What gives Mando the right to take it from him? Mando defends the kid, he defends the town. What's the difference between them? That he doesn't take his helmet off? What's the point of that anyway? The Marshal could start gesturing in the direction of these questions right here, but instead it's just a bunch of action sequences and references. The action sequences are cool, but they could have used him to start making these episodes about Mando again. The next episode gestures in the direction of some parallel between this mother's care for her eggs and Mando's care for the kid, but instead of actually digging into that parallel, Baby Yoda just eats a bunch of her eggs and she doesn't notice, and Mando tells him to stop. But it doesn't go any further than this. There's no emotional or thematic meat to this parallel, because there are no conflicts between these characters with any stakes. But it's not until the next episode that these missteps start causing long-term damage to the story. Here, Mando meets these other Mandalorians who apparently come from the other side of a cultural schism that Mando had somehow never heard of. This is kind of a weird choice since it makes Mando seem ignorant, but maybe they could use his ignorance to explain what the difference is. No? She vaguely says that Mando's tribe are a splinter group of religious zealots trying to reestablish the old way. What's the difference between the two ways? Is it really just that they can't take off their helmets? You know what, that's actually fine. Really, Star Wars is not primarily about the details of how stuff works. It's about the drama first and foremost. It's about the characters. We don't need to explain the nature of this cultural conflict if we instead use it as the basis of a character conflict between these two. But that just doesn't happen. And it would have been really easy. All she needs to do is needle Mando about his helmet in a personal way. She can make him out to be some sort of unfeeling, cold, and inhuman monster. It must be so sad to have no one you love enough to let them see your face. Stuff like this. Have her do it a lot, every opportunity. Have her tell Mando he must be a crap father because he can't connect to his kid through the helmet. I know she's another imported character, and we should respect her existing characterization, but she's already being presented as annoyingly superior and full of herself. If she's going to be rubbing us the wrong way, let's have her do it for a reason. Because this, like any good piece of dialogue, would accomplish many things at once. It gives this character relationship and the episode some personal drama. It shows us this cultural schism because this is how cultural conflicts in the real world actually work. A small difference between two similar groups is exaggerated into a massive difference that feels impossible to bridge. Most importantly, it's setting up our climax when Mando will break his vow so that Grogu can see his face. It gives them a conflict to be resolved. Because if the whole conflict between them was that she thought he was less than her, less feeling than her, when he pulls off his helmet for his farewell, that deflates that tension. It gives them the opportunity for genuine resolution, the we're not so different after all kind. It's not just me, right? It feels like that's what's supposed to happen here in a plot and character sense. I think they're going to have Mando go off and fight imps with the Darksaber alongside these Mandalorians next season. Characters reconciling their differences are what great team-ups are all about, and it's such a bummer that they don't even try to do it here. They kind of have them play nice with each other at the end of this episode, but it's the same way they have Mando and the Marshal play nice. They fight together, and then they are all friendly at the end. This is not character development or connection, it's just having them mouth niceties after they share danger. Yeah, they teamed up, but let's emphasize that they still have their differences so they can have that moment of genuine reconciliation at the end once Mando moves toward their philosophy. They could do similar things with other characters. Boba comes very close to being important in the story too. Mando is conflicted about giving him the armor since it goes against Creed, but Boba makes a good argument for why they should team up, centered around how they will guarantee the safety of the child. This is another small chance for Mando to begin placing his relationship to the child above the Creed. But before Mando can actually accept the deal on its own merits, the Empire conveniently shows up to force his hand. This is another opportunity for character development and foreshadowing of the climax wasted. Because they forgot to keep the conflict between Mando and these Mandalorians going, Bo will need to pick a fight with Boba in the bar scene when she could still be antagonizing Mando about their differences and setting up the climax. There's nothing wrong with this, except that it reminded me a lot of this scene. And I don't think that's how fire works. But Boba is going to leave this story forever in a few minutes, so we should probably try and keep the character conflict between characters who are going to stay on screen together. And this is another missed opportunity for Bo and Mando to fight about what it means to be a Mandalorian and give us some character drama to set up their climax. Mando and Boba just had their moment of reconciliation where Mando sees that Boba's dad was a foundling, and he just stands there while they tear into him. Boba's relationship to his dad mirrors the relationship between Grogu and Mando. We could make this the foundation of a new conflict between Mando and Bo if Mando would stick up for Boba. I'm starting to feel like I'm piling on, but the plotting and characterization is just really bad. It's bad in the most infuriating sort of way, where you can see how good it could be, but it's just not doing it. This isn't The Room or The Phantom Menace, where the story is so totally dysfunctional you can't even see what's supposed to be happening. They are definitely capable of writing functional stories. There is one character who gets to develop and have an arc all to themselves, and it's Bill Burr. Incredibly, one of the most one-dimensional characters from Season 1 comes back and gets a whole arc. He starts out this episode all cynical, saying the Empire and the Republic are the same. But in the end, he gets a little redemption arc where he personally calls out the Empire's philosophy as garbage and blows the entire installation to the sky. Bill Burr. Parts of it even connect back to Mando's story and character, though not in a new way, because it's mostly a redo of Mando's relationship with IG last season. I really loved Ahsoka's chapter. She was an awesome character. The quality of the filmmaking was top-notch, and at the end I was begging her to get on the ship and go with them so we could keep her around. But the best part was that it was about Mando and Grogu's relationship again. It was showing us the depth of their connection, the same way it did back in the first season. But as much as this was still about the relationship, and was an incredibly fun and cool episode to watch, it still didn't advance or grow their relationship. As Ahsoka tells us, Mando was like a father to Grogu. It was like that before, and it was still true at the end. This was a great episode, but nothing about it supports the show as a whole, except that she tells Mando where to go next. These two are the closest the show comes to having a story that's connected to the main characters, but they don't add anything that we didn't already know. Cowboy Bebop never misses an opportunity to turn something that seems like an arc for a side character, or even just a fun romp for the gang, into something that tells us about our characters or builds up the themes of the show. That is how you make a show about something, even when your hero is going off to random planets and interacting with characters that have nothing to do with the main plot. That is how you give a show real depth and substance, because without that, it's just sound and fury. It's all style and no substance. We are so far beyond show don't tell, I can't even see it in the rearview mirror. Characters are telling us things we don't need to know, don't care about, or already know. By the end, I just wish there was a functional story, just some sort of conflict and resolution to the meaninglessness that took up so much time this season. There is so much more I could say about all of the bad writing, plotting, and characterization in this season. There are so many things that just don't make sense, waste our time, or just plain don't work.
Take the Foundling to the city of Kaladin on the forest planet of Corvus. There you will find Ahsoka Tano. Tell her you were sent by Bo-Katan.
Why are you just listing off a bunch of names that mean nothing to us like you're a video game character telling us where we need to go next? This season is littered with wasteful dialogue like this. But the most important thing is to make a functional story with a genuine conflict that makes me care about your characters. And so if they couldn't even do that, there's no point to harping on about this other stuff. But I think once you have already told a good story once and gotten people to care about the characters in your show, that can carry it a long, long way. I totally understand why many people loved this season. If you're a Star Wars fan, it can be really fun to see some of your favorite characters in media brought in or referenced, and they did all of it really well. Luke, Ahsoka, Boba, they all seem true to the characters that people love. Combine that gratifying fan service with good style and fun action, and plenty of people will love it. And like I've said, there's nothing wrong with that. But it isn't what I signed up for. Yeah, the style is awesome. But I fell in love with more than just that. I loved the strong characterization, artfully done, the internal conflicts that really challenged our characters and made the story mean something. Even when the style started to shift, as long as there was good storytelling going on, I was into it. But this season was just so disappointing. But that's kind of normal. Even shows I absolutely love end up disappointing me. I can't think of a single show longer than one season that I liked all the way to the end. Every single one, at one point or another, just can't seem to hold on to whatever made it good to begin with. Visual mediums thrive on efficiency, of telling us a lot with a little. That's what the point of show don't tell really is. It's not about how much dialogue you use or whether a character is explaining something. It's about using exposition to tell us something about a character at the same time. It's about putting the camera in a place that shows us something about the character or the action, not just what's happening. It's about packing as much of the story as possible into every choice you make. When I look at all these shows that I've fallen out of love with, I see one root problem. They lose that efficiency. Instead of telling us a lot with a little, they're telling us so little with so much. Episodes just drag on and on and on. They squeeze as much screen time as they can out of every little idea, no matter how boring. The tone goes all over the place, and you wonder how they managed to make it so artful in the past. In my last video, I mentioned why I thought the Hobbit movies were so bad compared to The Lord of the Rings, and it's for the same reasons. You give people an incredibly complicated and nuanced story and you say, jam as much of this into 3 movies as you can, and you get an efficient and engaging story. You give them a fairly simple and short story and say, find some way to stretch this out into 3 movies, and you get a sagging mess of inconsistent tone and pointless, wasteful additions. With television shows and the way they can go on forever, and with how much money there is in going on forever, it seems like they always become a sagging mess at some point. Some of them manage to bring the quality back, but some of them don't. So to a certain extent, these problems with The Mandalorian are kind of normal for television shows. For me, the tragedy of this show is how quickly it happened. It started happening in season 1, which is the fastest I've ever seen. It completely took over the show by season 2. Now they are spinning it out into not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different shows, all based on The Mandalorian. It's almost gross how hard they are milking this. But I gotta admit, I'll probably check them out. They have absolutely nailed a Star Wars style here, and I want to see if they can carry it to these other shows. Boba and Ahsoka, even though they were kind of meaningless to the story and didn't have arcs, were still cool characters. I'm interested to see what they're going to try and do with them. I think they'll probably be like Mando Season 2, stylish but meaningless, but I may end up watching them all the same. A lot of times when shows begin to irritate me, I just stop watching, but I made it all the way through this season. It has to be doing something right. I mean, maybe I just did it because I wanted to make this video, but on the other hand, I've had zero desire to watch Rise of Skywalker. As much as this show disappointed me, I have to admit it's got style. I just wish it still had substance. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end. These videos take a ton of time and effort, so that means a lot. Even though I've reset my subscriber count to 0 now that I've criticized The Mandalorian, I will continue to work on the channel as much as I can, so subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. You can also find me on Twitter, where I'll post links to new videos, and Tumblr, where I post additional thoughts on my videos and would be happy to answer questions. I try to respond to all the unique questions I see in the comments, but it's easy to miss stuff. See you next time.